Hey everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. We have a Scorpio new moon coming up. This is the chart for it. It's happening on November 20th at 1:47 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, and that's 6:47 in the morning British Standard Time. The moon, the new moon, sun and moon are in Scorpio, or will be in Scorpio at 28 degrees of Scorpio, and Mercury will also be at 28 degrees of Scorpio. It's going backwards. So this is a very tight conjunction. It's called a partile conjunction, which just means they're all in the same degree. The theme that pops out for me is this theme of commitment. Scorpio has to do with commitment. In evolutionary astrology, they talk about the idea of the rug being pulled out from under you. That can happen in Scorpio. Scorpio in evolutionary astrology represents the soul. Its ruler, Pluto, modern ruler Pluto, also represents the soul. And the 8th house, where it's you'll naturally find Scorpio on the natural wheel, is also has to do with the soul. So the idea of the rug being pulled out from under you is part of that symbolism from an evolutionary astrology perspective, as I understand it. The idea is that this is a soul level dynamic that's occurring because we're out of alignment with our soul, and by having the rug pulled out beneath us, it's compelling us to be asking the question, why, and that why sort of acts like a drill that allows us to go deeper. And maybe it's not that we're out of alignment with the soul. Maybe it's that the soul is calling us to a deeper level, and or we're out of alignment with the soul. Scorpio is also about this idea of commitment. So what is our ultimate commitment? It's to our own soul. And we make that commitment with others. You could say when we're making commitments with others in some way, shape, or form, we're making commitments either in alignment with our own soul or out of alignment with our own soul. And so part of that rug being pulled out from under us, again, can perhaps be this idea of the need to realign. Mercury being retrograde, Mercury has to do with this idea of messaging. And it's interesting because we all kind of are messaging all the time, right? And I'm not talking about text messaging. I'm just saying that our communication is our message. We're sort of speaking who we are through what we communicate. And it's through that messaging, through that communication, that we decide to align with or not align with somebody, to make a commitment or not make a commitment to somebody. And so there's this idea of the messaging having something to do with the commitments we've made, and Mercury is retrograde. It's rethinking all of that. It's reviewing all of that. One way that I think about retrogrades, or the main way that I think about retrogrades, is this idea of development. We're moving into a new developmental leg of our journey. The point where the planet turns retrograde is the boundary between where we've been traveling or our previous developmental leg and the next one to come. And it turns retrograde to prepare for that. And then the point that it goes back to, in this case 20 degrees of Scorpio, would represent the thing that we're going back for. And then the midpoint of the cycle would represent maybe a point of clarity. I'm not going to go into detail about all those things with regard to Mercury retrograde because I don't have that information on hand. What I would do is I would look at the Sabian symbols for each of the relevant degrees and then kind of figure out what the story is that's being told. I would look at the point where it turns retrograde. What is that story about? What is the story of the next developmental step? And then the point that it turns direct, that's what we go back for. What is that story? What is the story of that thing that we're going back for? And that midpoint, how is that giving us clarity? Is that something to do with the thing we're going back for? Is it something to do with the next developmental step? Is it a combination of the two? And so I would then kind of just try to understand what that story is. But here, I just wanted to give the lay of the land about this idea that the idea of a retrograde is we're preparing to move to a next developmental leg. And with regard to Mercury, it's part of its retrograde journey is in Scorpio, so it's reviewing the commitments it's made. So it's this idea of are the commitments that I'm currently making, that I'm currently in, are they the right commitments for me? Are they the ones that can support me through this next developmental leg? Maybe they were right before, but they're not now. Maybe they were always out of alignment, and maybe I'm starting to become aware of that. The final few degrees, we could say, of a sign is where we kind of move into, I would say, clarifying territory. And the 29th degree is what's called the anaretic degree, and that's where that can be the most potent. But 28 degrees, and I would even say 27 degrees, you're starting to move into that, where you're starting to get clarity on things. So we may be getting clarity about the messages we've been hearing and saying yes to, and maybe we're getting clarity that those messages aren't right for us. Maybe they were right for us before, but they're not now. Maybe they were never right for us, but we were confused. We didn't fully understand. Maybe the messages are right, but the messenger, we've made commitments to the messenger, and the messenger isn't really living up to those messages, right? So it could be a whole lot of permutations. Maybe we were totally in alignment with those messages, but they aren't. We're finding out they're not actually the messaging isn't really in alignment with what we truly want or believe. And we'll get to the belief thing in a minute. And maybe we're starting to see new messages. We're becoming aware of new messages we hadn't been aware of before, and we're realizing, oh, that's actually more in alignment with who we are. So there are all sorts of ways that this can play out. Mars is in Sagittarius. It's at the focal point of T-square with the nodes, with the south node and the north node, our evolutionary trajectory. Mars is the modern day ruler of Aries. It's also the traditional ruler of Aries. Aries is about it's I am, who am I? And it's really about, I think of signs more as processes. So it's about the process of discovering who we are. It's really essential. And Mars in Sagittarius is about the beliefs we hold, truth and lies. And the way that I think about Mars in Sagittarius, as I'm thinking about this now, is that the truth that we align with out there, what we're trying to do is find the truth out there that's in alignment with the truth within us, our identity. I would make the case that who we are within intrinsically is already aligned with the truth. So we're just trying to figure out who that is inside and then find the truth out there that aligns with that. And if we can sync those up, we're on the right path. And so Mars in traditional astrology happens to rule Scorpio in addition to Aries. And if you think about that, the I am, discovering who we are. Well, if we haven't had the opportunity to discover who we are, and we get to the realm of making commitments, how are we going to know what to make commitments to? And then we get to the realm of Sagittarius. How are we going to know what out there has anything to do with who we are? So Mars in Sagittarius as the ruler of Scorpio says that so all of this is looking to Mars, we can say, and so it's looking for that connection between I am and the truth out there, and all of that has something to do with the commitments we make. So the seed of this chart, the foundation of the zodiac, you could say the beginning point of the zodiac on the natural wheel is Aries. So that piece of I am has downstream effects all the way as you go all the way around on the wheel. And so there's an invitation here, an opportunity here to come back into greater alignment with who we are. We may experience pretty intense emotions. That could be part of it. Scorpio has to do with intensity. We may feel a sense of betrayal that, somebody has been telling us this and they've been lying or something like that. They haven't been telling the truth. And that ultimately perhaps will help us to become more clear on our own truth. Perhaps we were not seeing clearly or something like that. This north node in this T-square is in Pisces. That's illusion, disillusion, but also clarity. So it may be that if there's any intensity that we experience, that's helping us to become more clear. we may discover that the messaging we believed in led us to daily practices in the past, the South Node in Virgo daily practices, that didn't lead to good results, that didn't lead to good ends. And now we're becoming aware of that. That could lead to feelings of betrayal, that sort of thing. But again, what we're getting from that is clarity. So the energies are helping us get clear. It's interesting because I don't usually look at these statistics over here in the sidebars, because usually they don't tell a whole lot in my experience. It's usually kind of like, yeah, there's sort of an even spread of everything, everything's kind of evened out. But it's a different story this time. So we have 6, and I just look at the traditional planets. I don't look at everything. There are 6 planets in water and 1 in fire. So it goes fire, earth, air, water. So 6 in water, 1 in fire, none in earth, and none in air. So there's a real heavy emphasis on water. That's emotions, and Scorpio is intensity. There are 4 planets in Scorpio. So we could experience some intensity. There are a lot of retrograde planets in this chart, so it may be that this is more internally felt than externally expressed, externally manifested. So we can use that energy to help us go deeper into ourselves, to get to know our truth more clearly, become more aware of it, and align ourselves more truly to our arrow, to what's true for us. And if we're doing that, and again, trusting that who we really are is in alignment with truth, then we can trust the arrow that we're aligning to. If we're aligning to the arrow that somebody else is convincing us to align with, we may be out of alignment with our truth, and that they may be pulling the wool over our eyes. That kind of dynamic could potentially play out, or potentially has in the past. So there's a lot of things working for us in this dynamic. And the main thing to me is the opportunity to realign with our own truth and to see through potentially messages. But also we may be able to see, maybe we've made commitments and those are good commitments, and maybe now we're seeing we want to make deeper commitments. That could be part of how things play out during this next month in these energies. One thing about water that I want to say, actually before I say that, the other interesting thing is to look at the decans, and again I'm just looking at the traditional planets. So this is the first decan, second decan, third decan. There are 5 planets in the this is 5 planets in the final decan of a sign. So every sign is broken up into 3 decans, or 10-degree segments. So 1 to 10 degrees, or 0 to 10 degrees, 10 to 20 degrees, 20 to 30 degrees. 5 of the planets, traditional planets in this chart, are in the final decan, the final leg of a sign. It's finishing up in a sign. And only 2 are in the middle decan, and that's more like the sustaining energy, and none are in the first, which is initiating energy. So it's all about finishing up with a little bit of, stability kind of going on there, or stabilizing or sustaining what's been. And that little bit of energy of sustaining but what's been, that could potentially be experienced as resistance that we have to overcome. But there's definitely much more energy towards letting, focused on letting go of that. However, over here is interesting too, because there are 4 planets in fixed signs, which are all the planets in Scorpio. So Scorpio can be about this idea of resistance. I think, however, what we're seeing isn't massive resistance, but the letting go of resistance that's allowing us to become more clear on what's true for us and what's not, and clear on the messages we've been saying yes to and what we really want to be saying yes to, our commitments. The other thing that I wanted to say about water is that it has to do, the way that I think of water, so water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, and I think of these all as having to do with some kind of birthing process, some kind of emergence process. Cancer, obviously the birth of the baby. Scorpio, it's like a purification, so the birth into a purer, more aligned expression of ourselves, manifestation of ourselves, you could say. And then Pisces, birth into a higher level of ourselves, you could say, something like that. So it's this idea of birth and this idea of emergence into some sort of new realm. So we may find, and if you think about things like commitment, like you marry somebody, you're making a deeper commitment through that marriage, right? And you enter into that union. You're entering into a new territory. Who's done that before? Assuming it's the first time you've been married, right? Who's done that before? A baby is born into a new realm. The baby doesn't know about that new realm. The parent, if it's a new parent, they don't know. This is all new to them. So there's a sense of something new. We usually think, of course, of Aquarius as having to do with the new, the future, the thing we don't know. But this birthing thing has something to do with that too. So a lot of water energy, emotions. How do we know how to navigate the new? Well, we tune into our emotions. How do we know what commitments to make commitments to, what messages to make commitments to? We tune into how they make us feel. Not how somebody wants us to feel, but how they actually make us feel. There's a distinction there. And so water energy is going to be big. I think because of all the retrograde energy, we're going to see a lot of this happening more in our internal realms and in our external realms, individually and collectively, like the collective body, you could say. Maybe we're going to be processing more of this in the internal realms than the external realms. That would be my guess about how this is going to play out this month. But it'll be interesting to see, as always, as we walk through these. I've had a lot of, as Mercury has been in its retrograde period, I've had a couple of things really come up, really intense things that I feel like I was one I was able to really get insight into, another I was able to process a little bit, and I feel like they're kind of setting me up for this lunation cycle. So if you have been paying attention, whatever has been going on in your life, that may be giving you some insight into the role of Mercury and how that's been setting things up for this lunation cycle. So for me, for example, I had a big run-in with AI, where it kept defaulting to a particular kind of feedback. I was uploading drafts of an article. I wanted feedback on them, and I wanted a specific type of feedback that would help me understand my ideas, help me get in touch with what I wanted to say, help me, see what was emerging from what I was writing. And it kept defaulting to telling me how the reader might see it and how this idea doesn't really make sense, and you might want to think about it this way, which wasn't helping me at all. It was really challenging and frustrating. And I've had that experience with AI, and I know about it. It's sort of trained to assume you're writing for an academic audience on academic things, and you want to make sure you're not writing too much in your own voice, but in the voice that is acceptable to academia, right? And it just drives me nuts. But it's like whatever. But this really got to me. And like I kept pressing it and pushing back on it. And eventually I kind of came to understand. I had this moment where I was like, I understood this was a developmental moment for me. Like this was something I had experienced throughout my life, but it just was like it started so young that I didn't even get to know that it was an issue, a problem. And what I came to understand is I'm wired to learn in a fundamentally different way than the status quo mainstream approach. Expectation or setup around learning happens. And so if you think about Mercury ruling Gemini, Gemini has to do with that early learning environment. And if you think about Gemini on the natural wheel falls in the first quadrant, that has to do with identity. It's the final step in that identity process. We have to have the freedom to discover who we are. Then we have to have the support to establish who we are. And then we have to have the support to explore, you could say, who we are, to become curious about the world around us and sort of feel, make sense of what that says about us and us in relationship with that, all that kind of thing. I think of it as like the tree, the Taurus is the tree trunk, and then the Gemini is the process of branching off from that. And if you don't have the tree trunk established, the branching is just like weeds going all over the place, and it's really confusing. that fits with the idea of evolutionary astrology, in that they talk about how in Gemini you can take in so much information that you get overwhelmed. The way that I think about that is that overwhelming part happens if you don't have a clear sense of identity and haven't been able to establish that. If you've been able to do those two steps, then what you're exploring is what's relevant to your own trunk, to your own path, to your own identity. And then that becomes part of the process of continuing to get to know yourself. And so learning is a really important part of that process of identity. And if you don't get to learn in the way that's right for you, there's that avenue that's blocked off to expanding. If you think about branching as a kind of expansion, and Gemini as being opposed to Sagittarius being about expansion. So in its way, there's an expansion kind of quality to Gemini, or aspect to Gemini. Then you don't get to expand beyond a certain point, And so it struck me. It was a huge moment for me of understanding of how impactful the experience was of having to adapt and conform to the external standards of how we learn, external methods and modes of how we learn, and never even getting to get in touch with how I actually learn. So anyway, that was a big moment for me. I had another one, I won't actually go into it, but you may have been having moments of insight. Part of it will depend for you if Mercury is activating your chart in any way, shape, or form. And so you may or may not have had things happening since Mercury turned retrograde. I just want to actually look at the dates for when that is, because it's bugging me right now that I don't know it. And it'll be good information for you to have. So Mercury turned retrograde on November 9th. It went into its shadow period in October, though. I think maybe around the 20th. That's not the exact date, but later in October, it went into its shadow period. It actually turned retrograde on the 9th, and that was around 6 degrees of Sagittarius, and it will turn direct on November 29th, and that will be around 20 degrees of Scorpio. So those are the dates, and I'm not sure when it's going to finish up its retrograde, but in terms of when it has been retrograde. And for me, it was during its actual retrograde leg that I had that experience. And I had another very intense experience around, I have complex PTSD that I'm healing from, and a very intense experience around that Scorpio intensity. And I will say a little bit about this. So I have periods where I have this really extreme stress triggered by, for example, this one was triggered by the government shutdown and food security, food insecurity. I knew spiritually that I was going to be okay, but as things kept getting down to the wire, I just lost it. I just wasn't able to maintain my belief, right? And so I just went into a whole lot of stress. And when it gets like that, I call it as like through the roof stress. And so what I try to do is go in and just allow myself to feel it. Usually when I'm in it, the cascading effect has happened. There's nothing I can do about it, so that sort of starts to slow down. But as soon as I can, I try to go into it and feel it. And in the past, the only thing I've been able to do is feel that stress chemical kind of going through my body, and haven't been able to get underneath it, haven't been able to process beneath that. No, I don't even want to say me processing, but is the level that I was able to feel it at. And I was actually feeling kind of despondent leading up to this period, or I was feeling despondent before I lay down and feel into it, because I'm like, it never leads to anything. I never get to the nub of it. I never get, nothing gets to the point where it changes. Well, I did get to something this time, and I was able to feel literal terror in my brain. That's what I was experiencing, and I could even feel it in my eyes. And that would be Scorpio, fear, terror, And so I finally felt, I definitely didn't get all the way through it, but I finally felt a sense of relief, not necessarily in that stress in that moment, but a relief in the sense of, I will be able to get through this. I will be able to get to the other side, because I finally got to the nub. So that was another huge thing for me. And that was in the brain, right? Mercury, mind. And this Mercury during this retrograde cycle, it won't actually, so I have a T-square in my chart that has Saturn at 19 degrees of Aquarius, the moon at 19 degrees of Taurus, and Neptune here at 17 degrees of Scorpio, also Juno at 19 degrees of Scorpio. So Mercury is going to go back to 20 degrees. It doesn't quite reach 19 degrees or 17 degrees, but it gets pretty darn close. So I feel like it is activating that T-square in my chart through ripple effect and perhaps through progression kind of thing. But I'm definitely noticing it, and that's been insightful for me to know that it doesn't necessarily have to go back and actually touch your planet, but it can come just close enough. And so that was a huge moment for me. And again, setting me up. It'll be interesting to see how this new moon plays out. So anyway, that is what I have to say about this chart. The big thing that I always like to communicate is that, I see what I see in the chart, and a lot of it is based on my own experiences, in terms of what I'm going through in the moment, and also, the particular healing that I've done and the perspective that gives me. What matters is what's going on in your life. If you pay attention to what's going on in your life, whether you know the astrology or not, you'll understand what the energies are about for you, and that's what matters. And each archetype stands for a whole lot of different things. It's like there's a whole bucket full of things that each archetype stands for, and so there's a lot of things I don't even mention, and those may be some of the things that are playing out for you. What's interesting about astrology, if you're interested in learning it, is that it does give a nice mirror back. And also, as you start to look at those bucket full of things that seem utterly unrelated, you start to see the connection. You start to see how one thing relates to the other. So for me, astrology becomes a really great teaching tool. Really helps you understand things in ways you wouldn't have understood before. But anyway, I will leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful for you, and if you liked it, like and subscribe if that is calling you. I will leave it there. Take care. Bye.